On October 12, 1937, deputies in McDowell County logged an incident that was never supposed to leave the courthouse basement. The entry is short, no more than a paragraph, written in the stilted language of Appalachian law enforcement. Found female, age approximately 15, wearing stained white garment. Male present, older, claimed lawful marriage under divine covenant. Witnesses absent. File sealed. That was it. A girl in a blood-stained wedding dress. A man beside her, her own father, insisting the union was not only legal but holy. For decades, this record was hidden among property disputes and livestock citations, tucked in a cardboard box marked "withdrawn." But the detail that lingers, what makes the skin crawl long after the ink fades, is the final line, added in a different hand, "Return to Hollow per family request." The Hollow. A place rarely named, rarely mapped. And yet, it sits in the very heart of McDowell County, West Virginia, coal country, Bible country, a place where silence is older than stone. In the courthouse archives there is a gap. Page 401 ends with a bootlegging charge. Page 402 should follow, but the ledger jumps directly to 403. The girl's file is 402A. A ghost page, slotted out of sequence, hidden behind brown envelopes. As if the law itself wanted to erase the memory. Archivists say this happens often, misfiled pages, clerical errors. But the penmanship tells a different story. The name Ashcroft appears faintly in the margins. That surname hasn't appeared in McDowell's tax or census ledgers since 1928, when the Ashcroft family stopped paying dues on their land in Panther Hollow. And yet, there it was in 1937, attached to a girl in a ruined wedding dress. The deeper one reads, the stranger the evidence becomes. A surviving clipping from the Charleston Gazette, dated October 14, 1937, mentions a disturbance at a rural chapel. The article ran only once, then vanished from microfilm. No names, no photographs. Just 3 sentences. An unlawful ceremony was interrupted in McDowell County this week. Officials declined to release details, citing the preservation of family dignity. All parties have been returned to their residence. Returned. Not arrested. Not rescued. Returned. The Ashcrofts had been known to county officials, but never in ways that stuck to paper. Census takers in 1910 listed 6 children, none named. The ledger simply reads, Household, Ashcroft, male head, wife, 6 issue. By 1920, the family is listed as absent, though neighbors testified they never moved. A coal company surveyor, writing in 1923, notes, cabin in Panther Hollow inhabited but not approachable. Locals warn against trespass. Reports of unnatural unions. These phrases, unnatural unions, unlawful ceremony, family dignity, tell us less about the law and more about its blindfold. When truth was too heavy, it was sealed. Buried. Handed back to the very people who demanded silence. There is an oral history captured on tape in 1961 that never reached the public. In an interview for the McDowell Gazette, 83-year-old Lena Hartsfield described being a girl in the 1930s, attending school near Panther Hollow. She remembered a girl named Lillian Ashcroft who came for 1 year, then vanished. Lena recalled, she never took her shoes off. Even when we played stickball, she kept them on, tied tight like she was afraid someone would take them. Her hands were soft but her face was hard. We asked once if she had a beau. She said, my father chose me. After that, the teacher told us not to ask again. Hartsfield's testimony was never published. The Gazette kept the tapes, but the transcripts were cut. The family of the editor, a church deacon, requested it be stricken from the record. And still, fragments remain. Property tax ledgers from 1927 still list Isaac Ashcroft as active, though no burial record exists after 1925. School logs note Mary A. and Lillian A., with check marks beside their names until 1934, then blank columns after. One line in the punishment ledger survives. Mary Ashcroft, 1934, disciplined for defiance, wrote no father, no husband on her slate. The writing of children often tells more truth than the writing of men. Walking through the hollow today, the silence feels wrong. The trees grow too close together. The paths stop suddenly as though erased by an intentional hand. Locals say the hollow takes back what doesn't belong. Hunters refuse to track deer there. Children dare each other to step past the first sycamore, but none stay past sundown. One folklorist from Marshall University, writing in a 1973 field journal, claimed the hollow was once the site of marriage rituals outside the law, justified by a twisted reading of scripture. In the journal's margin he added, was it madness, or generational conditioning. Hard to say where belief ends and horror begins. The more you peel back the files, the clearer the picture becomes, though never complete. The girl in the white dress was not unique. She was simply the one caught, logged, and returned. Her story survived only because a deputy wrote it down before being told to forget. The wedding in the hollow was not a single event but part of a pattern. An inheritance passed down like land, like coal rights, like sin. And to this day, the courthouse basement carries the smell of mildew, wet wool, and milk gone sour. It is the smell of rooms left too long without song, where no laughter echoes, where every page feels like it remembers what you are not supposed to see. We stand here, decades later, with only fragments. A girl's name half-burned. A wedding license unsigned. A clipping cut from microfilm. But every fragment is enough to remind us. Silence does not erase. It only waits. And still the questions gnaw. Was this the sickness of one family, or the echo of something older, carried down like a curse? Was it madness or ritual? Was it faith corrupted, or faith fulfilled? The records will not answer. The town will not answer. And the hollow never answers. If your family ever whispered about a wedding in the woods, if the name Ashcroft or McCrae or Kincaid sits in your bloodline, write it below. Every comment keeps another file alive. And subscribe, because silence is how they won. If we do not speak their names, the hollow will. On maps of West Virginia printed in the 1930s, McDowell County is little more than a smudge in the southern coalfields, hemmed in by ridges that swallow roads and silence the air. Outsiders called it the end of the line. For the families who lived there, it was the beginning of something they couldn't leave. Census records show that in 1910, the county's population peaked at nearly 100,000, drawn in by coal seams as black as ink and veins of gas that hissed in the dark. By 1930, that number had begun to collapse. Mines shuttered, rivers flooded, and men left with their lunch pails empty, never to return. What remained were hollowed-out towns clinging to hillsides, names that barely appeared on maps: Keystone, War, Panther, Bradshaw. Places where even the mail arrived late, if it arrived at all. To understand the hollow, you must understand McDowell itself. This was land that fed on isolation. Roads that led nowhere. Churches that doubled as schoolhouses. Families who measured time not in years but in seasons of flood and famine. A 1925 state infrastructure survey noted that entire tracts of the county had no passable route for wagons, only footpaths and mule trails. This was not oversight, it was abandonment. The state drew the lines, the companies took the coal, and the people were left behind, locked in their valleys like insects in amber. When outsiders write about Appalachia, they call it forgotten. But that word is a mercy. Forgotten suggests innocence. McDowell was not forgotten, it was sealed off. Intentionally, decisively, like a wound bound tight so it festers unseen. In one set of WPA field notes from 1936, a folklorist traveling through McDowell observed, "The women here do not speak if men are near. They keep their eyes down as though afraid of being counted." The note ends abruptly, several cabins stand abandoned. Neighbors say they are not abandoned but unapproachable. The land itself seemed to enforce silence. Coal companies own not just the mines but the houses, the schools, the very breath of the county. Pay ledgers show families trapped in debt they could never escape. Some surnames, Ashcroft, McCrae, Kincaid, appear repeatedly, tied to company store accounts that were never settled. If a man died underground, his widow and daughters inherited not his wealth, but his debt. And debt is a form of captivity. Captivity breeds secrecy. In Panther Hollow, secrecy hardened into ritual. The geography played its part. The mountains here are not gentle. They loom. They cut light into ribbons and cast shadows that linger like bruises. Oral tradition says the sun touches the hollow less than 6 hours a day. The rest of the time it is twilight, an endless dusk where truth bends easily into myth. Children growing up in those valleys were taught not to wander past the second creek. If they did, they said, the forest would mark them. There are records of children going missing in McDowell throughout the 1920s and 30s, missing person notices in county papers, usually retracted within days. A boy named Samuel Perry, age 7, disappeared in 1929 while carrying water from a spring. His notice read, "Lost in woods, presumed drowned." But a handwritten addendum in the sheriff's blotter says, "Witness claims he was led. Singing heard." The file ends there. The decline of industry only deepened the darkness. By 1935, McDowell County was among the poorest in the state. Families lived in cabins without glass windows, patched with tin and rags. School registers dwindled. One-room schoolhouses shut their doors. Hunger became another silence, one not spoken, only endured. A 1934 relief report noted, children appear smaller than average, brittle bones, poor eyesight, an entire generation marked by want. Malnutrition does more than weaken the body. It frays the mind. It makes people easier to bend, easier to command. And when there is nothing to eat, faith becomes the only bread left. That faith, however, was not always the kind preached in Sunday pulpits. In McDowell, isolated families wrote their own scripture. They copied verses by hand, altering words, bending passages until they justified what would be unthinkable elsewhere. In the basement of a collapsed Methodist church near Bradshaw, a water-damaged Bible was recovered in 1972. Scholars noted certain verses from Leviticus and Genesis marked with ash crosses, annotated with the phrase, "The Father is husband. The husband is God." No preacher would have sanctioned this, but in the hollow with no one watching, doctrines fermented like rot in a sealed jar. What makes McDowell terrifying is not what is recorded but what is absent. Land deeds without signatures. Birth records without fathers' names. Death certificates filed years late, if at all. Even the United States Census stumbled. In 1930, entire valleys are marked only with the word unenumerated. These absences are not voids. They are shields. Behind them, families could enact whatever rituals they wished, safe from scrutiny, guarded by geography and poverty alike. One can almost hear the silence if you walk those ridges now. Abandoned company towns, their schools collapsed into weeds, their churches burned or caved in. A silence thick enough to feel in the lungs. Locals say the birds do not sing near the hollow, not because they fear, but because there is nothing to sing over. They say even wind avoids the cabins that still stand, as if unwilling to stir old dust. If you ask in town, most will shrug and change the subject. But sometimes, if you're lucky, an elder will mutter a phrase, "They married their own in the hollow. And God looked away." Every county has its secrets. But McDowell's are not scattered. They are concentrated, sealed in its valleys like black water behind a dam. When the dam cracked in 1937 with that file of the blood-stained bride, the county rushed to cover it, to call it a disturbance, a misunderstanding, a matter of family dignity. But dignity is a mask. And in McDowell County, masks were all that kept the hollow from spilling its truth into daylight. The records left behind tell us enough. A town gutted by poverty, abandoned by the state, twisted by doctrines scribbled in margins. A geography that shelters silence. And a silence that shelters sin. That is McDowell. That is the ground in which the Ashcrofts and others planted their rituals. And it is the ground that still holds them. The Ashcrofts were never supposed to be remembered. Their name survives only in fragments, like a stain that resists being scrubbed clean. The first trace appears in an 1870 agricultural census for McDowell County. The ledger notes a man named Thomas Ashcroft, farmer, subsistence, for dependents. There is no land deed attached, only the phrase squatter's claim. By 1885, the Ashcrofts vanish from tax rolls, yet neighbors continue to mention them in testimonies, always as a shadow at the edge of community life. They paid no dues, sent no representatives, joined no churches. And yet, the name lingered like smoke on clothing. The bloodline is strange not for what is present but for what is absent. Most families in the region can be traced through church registries, cemetery stones, or school rosters. The Ashcrofts appear inconsistently, as though they slipped in and out of record at will. In 1901, a coal company employment ledger lists an Isaac Ashcroft as a mule handler at the Panther Hollow seam. But no wages are recorded. In 1902, a county health report mentions child born with deformity, surname Ashcroft. No birth certificate survives. In 1919, a jail log notes, Ashcroft I. charged with indecency, released without trial. The line ends there. The name returns again and again in half-entries never complete. Locals whispered of them as a family apart. One 1928 Works Progress survey describes Panther Hollow as occupied by a lineage unwilling to engage with civic life. The same surveyor noted the cabins were built inward, facing each other in a circle, more like a compound than a homestead. Outsiders called it superstition. Insiders called it protection. A thread of oral folklore suggests the Ashcrofts carried rituals far older than the county itself. Some claim they descended from English separatists who fled into Appalachia in the 18th century, carrying a faith too severe for even the Puritans. Others insist they were Scots-Irish settlers who cut ties with kin and turned their scripture inward. Whatever the origin, by the time their name appears in Panther Hollow, their beliefs had hardened into something sealed, private, and dangerous. There is an account from a teacher, Miss Clara Jennings, who worked at a one-room school near War, West Virginia in 1927. In a letter preserved by her descendants, she wrote, "The Ashcroft children are peculiar. They do not laugh when spoken to. They recite only the verses they have memorized at home. They sit together always. When asked their ages, none of them know the number. Only one girl, Mary, whispered to me once, 'We are not allowed to count. Father says counting is for those who leave.'" Jennings left McDowell the following year. The Ashcrofts resisted burial traditions as well. Graveyards across the county carry no stone bearing their name. Yet in Panther Hollow, hikers have found rows of crude wooden posts, unmarked, driven into the ground in uneven clusters. One oral account from 1952 describes a boy who wandered into the hollow and returned with a story of sleeping brides, laid beneath those markers, their names never spoken. When adults dismissed him, he refused to sleep indoors for the rest of his life, building a lean-to outside his mother's cabin until he froze to death in the winter of 1958. The family carried another strange marker: repetition of names. Across scattered documents, one finds only 3 male given names: Thomas, Isaac, Isaiah, and 3 female names: Mary, Sarah, Lillian. It is as if the bloodline was caught in a loop, rebirthing the same figures generation after generation. A marriage ledger from neighboring Tazewell County in 1899 shows an Isaiah Ashcroft, age 23, to Sarah Kincaid, age 15. 20 years later, McDowell logs a marriage between an Isaac Ashcroft and a Mary Kincaid. The signatures are identical, the handwriting unchanged despite the decades. Scholars who have studied the ledgers remark that the loops of the letters are too consistent, as though written by a single hand impersonating multiple men across time. What unsettles researchers most is the absence of separation between family roles. Census takers occasionally marked daughter beside a child's name, only to cross it out and write wife. A 1910 enumerator added a margin note: "The girl who answers the door refers to the man as father and husband." That note is underlined twice, then scratched over so violently that the paper tore. The Ashcroft cabin itself was described by the few outsiders who entered as unnatural in design. Rooms were small, ceilings low, hallways narrow. In 1932, a county assessor noted that the interior walls were covered with writing, biblical verses, names, dates, scratched into wood with knives. One wall bore the phrase, "The bride is blood. The blood is God." The assessor resigned the following month. What emerges is not a simple genealogy but a system, an enclosed lineage that recycled itself, refusing outside contact, rewriting scripture to sanctify what others called sin. The Ashcrofts turned their own blood into covenant. They erased the boundary between father and husband, daughter and wife. They did not vanish from records because they were forgotten. They vanished because they chose a different archive. One written in blood, one kept in wood and ash, one passed through whispers in the hollow where no census taker could follow. To this day, the Ashcroft name is absent from official cemeteries, yet locals say the hollow is full of them, voices, shapes, whispers that sound like children speaking in scripture. Some hunters insist they've seen a woman in a white dress standing at the tree line, always barefoot, always silent. When approached, she turns not to flee but to vanish, as if the hollow itself swallows her. And so the Ashcrofts remain half real, half shadow. Their family tree is not written in stone but in silence. The deeper you search, the clearer it becomes that the silence was deliberate. Not an accident of poverty, not the oversight of bureaucracy, but a choice made to protect a ritual that could not survive daylight. Belief systems so rigid, so sealed, that outsiders mistook it for madness. Yet within Panther Hollow that faith functioned like iron. The earliest written evidence comes from a confiscated journal in 1894. According to a sheriff's report, a deputy seized a leather-bound notebook from a man identified only as T. Ashcroft. The pages were covered in scripture, but none matched word for word with the King James Bible. Verses were spliced, inverted, rewritten until meaning bent into command. One fragment read, "And the bride shall not leave her father, for he is her keeper, and she is his covenant." The journal disappeared from county archives in 1911. Its citation remains, but the object is gone. Their theology blurred the lines between worship and blood. In a 1936 interview, a coal miner named Russell Dyer told the Bluefield Daily Telegraph that he'd been invited to a gathering in the hollow during a revival drought. He described candles placed not on altars but on the ground in a circle, with a girl standing at the center in white. Each man laid a hand on her head, reciting words Russell did not recognize. "They called it a wedding," he said, "but it was no wedding I ever seen in church." Dyer refused to testify when the county asked for details. Within a year he left West Virginia for Ohio and never returned. At the core of their practice was the idea that family itself was the church. No pastor, no outsider, no congregation could sanctify them. Blood was both sacrament and scripture. Girls were called brides from childhood, trained to memorize verses that did not exist anywhere outside the hollow. One former schoolteacher recalled hearing a young Ashcroft girl whisper, "We are already married. We were born that way." The rituals followed seasonal rhythms, tied less to Christian holidays than to the land itself. County almanacs note bonfires in Panther Hollow on the same nights year after year. October 12th, February 3rd, June 9th. Farmers in adjoining valleys described hearing bells in the woods at midnight, though no church stood within miles. A 1940 psychiatric intake file from Marion State Hospital records a patient, a woman in her 40s named Sarah A., who repeated the same phrase under sedation. When the bride cries, the bells ring. If she laughs, the hollow dies. She was committed for religious mania. No family ever claimed her body when she died in 1942. There were also accounts of fasting rituals. A 1922 health inspector noted that the Ashcroft children appeared undernourished but not starving, their skin pale, their eyes unblinking. In his notes he added, "They speak of 40 days without bread, only milk. They believe hunger burns sin." The inspector filed his report, but no follow-up was recorded. His signature does not appear on any later county documents. The Ashcrofts redefined sin in ways outsiders could not reconcile. Where others saw violation, they saw covenant. Where others saw incest, they saw obedience. A confiscated hymn book from 1908 carried lines rewritten from familiar psalms. "Make of me a vessel, O Lord, bind me to my Father, that his seed be thy name." Archivists who catalogued the book added a warning at the bottom of the file, "Not to be circulated. Offensive content." The hymn book vanished sometime during the 1950s. What frightens researchers is not merely the content of the rituals, but their endurance. Even after families moved away, fragments persisted. A 1971 oral history project at Concord College captured the voice of an elderly woman, Lillian H., who recalled being warned as a child, "Never walk the hollow in June. That's when they pick their brides. You'll hear the bells but don't look. If you look, they'll call your name." The faith also manifested in architecture. When a fire partially destroyed the Ashcroft homestead in 1939, a surveyor catalogued the remains. He noted that the fireplace stones were arranged not in a square but in a circle, with carved initials facing inward. The chimney bricks were inscribed with words, "Bride, Blood, Bound." No photographs survive, but his sketches remain, filed under McDowell County property loss, case #412B. Even childbirth was ritualized. Neighbors recounted midwives being turned away. One oral account from 1947 describes a woman seen laboring in the hollow, her cries echoing through the trees. No doctor was summoned. When asked afterward, the Ashcrofts claimed God had delivered. No birth certificates were ever filed. The children appeared weeks later, pale, silent, eyes too wide. The theology did not simply bind them inward. It repelled the outside world. Postal carriers refused to enter Panther Hollow after repeated encounters with children reciting scripture in unison at the treeline. Coal companies avoided surveying deeper seams after workers reported symbols carved into trees, crosses inverted, rings of letters encircling trunks like brands. A 1925 mining report concluded, "Resources present. Inaccessible due to local opposition." No further attempts were made. The Ashcrofts' faith bent scripture into a cage. Each generation was trapped inside the words of the last, unable to leave, unable to break covenant. And because the rituals were always rewritten, always shifted, no outsider could ever trace a pure origin. The faith existed only in fragments, like a mirror broken on purpose. Every shard reflected something recognizable, psalms, prayers, hymns, but assembled, they formed a face no church would recognize. To this day, echoes of those rituals bleed through the region. Campers report hearing bells with no source, midnight hymns sung in voices too young to belong to anyone living. Hunters stumble across trees marked with names that no longer exist in census rolls. Families who once lived near Panther Hollow still forbid their children from wearing white into the woods. And in certain basements of county courthouses, in folders mislabeled or sealed too tightly, scraps of that theology survive, marriage licenses that double as birth records, hymn fragments that read like curses, psychiatric files where patients whisper the same impossible verses over decades. The county tried to bury those papers. Time tried to erase the voices. But the rituals remain, stitched into the soil, waiting for anyone willing to read them. The first time Panther Hollow made the papers, it wasn't because of faith or famine. It was because of a wedding. And it was the kind of wedding no one wanted to print. On October 14, 1937, the Charleston Gazette ran a one-paragraph notice buried on page 7. McDowell deputies investigate unlawful ceremony in Panther Hollow. No charges filed. Names withheld. By the next day the article was gone. No reprint, no correction. Just silence where a story had tried to surface. What little remains comes from county depositions, scraps of testimony whispered in the courtroom before the record was sealed. A schoolteacher, Margaret Kincaid, reported seeing her student, a 15-year-old girl named Lillian Ashcroft, arrive at class in a torn white dress. The hem was stained red, the veil pinned unevenly into her hair with twine. Margaret said the girl trembled when asked to read aloud, her voice breaking over every word. When Margaret pressed her, the girl whispered, "He's my husband now." The teacher filed a report with the sheriff's office that same evening. According to docket entry 402A, deputies visited the Ashcroft cabin and found Lillian inside, still wearing the dress. She was barefoot. Her father, Isaac Ashcroft, stood beside her, holding a Bible so worn its spine split in his hands. He told deputies the marriage was sanctioned by God. He presented a handwritten license signed only with the family's surname. No witnesses. No officiant. No date. The deputies logged the encounter but did not make an arrest. The record shows only this line, "Family matter. Resolved internally." But the cracks widened. 2 days later, Lillian was brought to Welch General Hospital with abdominal bleeding. A nurse, Helen Braddock, later told investigators the girl refused examination. She clutched her dress to her chest and repeated, "I am married. I am married. I am married." Braddock said she had never heard someone sound so certain and so terrified at the same time. Hospital staff contacted the county welfare office. Notes from caseworker Daniel McCready survive in the archives, smudged and incomplete. He wrote, "Child insists union is holy covenant. Repeats verses not recognized. Father uncooperative. Local officials advise non-intervention." McCready attempted a follow-up visit. Within a month he was reassigned to Raleigh County. His name never appears in McDowell records again. The press attempted once more to surface the story. On November 2, 1937, the Bluefield Daily Telegraph carried a short article headlined "Girl in Hollow Taken as Bride." It named no individuals but referred to a marriage between kin judged improper by modern law. 2 days later, every copy of that edition in McDowell County libraries was missing. Librarians logged the thefts, but no replacements arrived. The issue exists today only in microfilm at the state archives. 4 years afterward, whispers replaced print. Coal miners claimed to see Lillian walking the ridge at dusk, her dress dragging in the dirt, her eyes empty. Women at the general store told stories of a girl buying flour with hands that trembled so badly she dropped the coins, only to have her father pick them up for her. In oral histories, older residents recall seeing her at church once, sat in the back row, never sang, never looked up from the floor. Courtroom fragments confirm the county considered intervention. A 1938 session note refers to Ashcroft versus State, closed hearing. No transcript survives, but docket margins carry a single phrase, "Case dismissed." Family preservation paramount. What preservation meant, no one could agree. The most chilling record lies in a personal journal discovered in 1973. The journal belonged to Reverend Amos McCrae, a Methodist pastor who served in McDowell during the 1930s. On the entry dated November 7, 1937, he wrote, "Visited Hollow. Girl scarcely speaks. Forced to kneel beside father as he recited vows again before me. I refused sanction. They said I had already given it by watching. Fear I am complicit by sight alone." Reverend McCrae resigned from his post the following spring. He moved north to Pennsylvania and never returned. His journal was found decades later among church donations, its spine cracked, pages water-stained, but his words still legible. Every piece of evidence suggests that by the late 1930s, the Ashcroft secret was no longer entirely contained. Neighbors knew. Teachers knew. Doctors and pastors knew. But each in turn found their reports erased, their warnings ignored, their files buried under sealed or withdrawn. It wasn't that no one noticed, it was that those who noticed were silenced. One final testimony stands out. In a 1951 psychiatric file from Weston State Hospital, A patient listed only as LA spoke under sedation of a wedding in the woods. She described her father holding her hand against a page, forcing her to write her name. She described candles burning low, hymns sung off-key, bells ringing though no church was near. The transcript ends abruptly with the note, "Patient hysterical. Session terminated." LA died in 1953 of unspecified causes. Her file was sealed until 1992, when researchers petitioned for access under state records law. The girl's story had surfaced again and again, only to be pressed back into silence. Each time it emerged, it carried more weight, more dread. The Ashcroft's theology had moved from rumor to ritual, and finally into law. Marriages recorded, names signed, children born into contracts no state recognized but no church would undo. The event of 1937 was not just a wedding. It was the moment the outside world saw the Hollow for what it was. A place where family and faith were chained together until neither could be separated. The authorities had a choice: confront it or bury it. They chose burial. And in doing so, they ensured the ritual survived, waiting to surface again. And so the story lingers. Not because it was printed in the papers, but because it wasn't. Not because the courts pursued justice, but because they didn't. Silence became its own kind of record, thicker than any file, heavier than any law. The most fragile records are never the court documents or the newspaper clippings. Those can be sealed, burned, erased. What lingers longest are the voices, the words spoken by people who saw, people who remembered, and then were made to vanish. The first witness we can name was Margaret Kincaid, the schoolteacher who first reported seeing Lillian in that torn wedding dress. After her report was ignored by the sheriff, she began keeping her own journal. A copy of that journal surfaced in 1968 during an estate sale in Tazewell County. In it she wrote, "Child does not laugh. Child recites verses not taught in class. When asked to solve arithmetic, she answers, 'What God joins, no man divides.'" Her hands are marked where rope has rubbed. Margaret's entries continued until 1941, when the handwriting trails off mid-sentence. Today Isaac stood outside the schoolhouse window watching. The rest of the page is blank. Margaret resigned that same year, moving out of state. No further record of her life has been found. Another testimony emerges from the Weston State Hospital archives. In 1945, a 22-year-old woman was admitted under the name Patient A317. The intake notes describe her as malnourished, soft-spoken, with persistent delusion that she was both wife and daughter to the same man. In a session transcript, she said, "The wedding was in the hollow. Bells with no tower. The hymn was sung by children who had no faces. When asked the man's name, she whispered, 'Isaac.' Doctors marked her as schizophrenic. But among the case notes, a nurse scribbled in the margin, 'She does not sound insane. She sounds rehearsed.'" That patient disappeared from the roster in 1948. Hospital records say she self-discharged. No forwarding address, no burial certificate. The most chilling witness account was not written but recorded. In 1973, a folklorist named Charles Benton conducted interviews across McDowell County for an oral history project. He brought a portable reel-to-reel recorder into farmhouses and kitchens, asking elderly residents to recall childhood stories. On tape 11, he spoke with a woman identified only as Evelyn, age 79. Her voice, cracked and trembling, says, "I saw her once in the woods. She was in white, but the dress was dirty. She carried a book upside down. A man told her to smile and she did, but only with her teeth. She was already gone." After that recording, Benton's field notes include an unsettling line, "Interview cut short. Evelyn's grandson asked us to leave. Said we shouldn't speak her name. Fear in his eyes." Benton's tapes sat in storage at Concord College until 1991, when graduate students cataloged them. Tape 11 was missing. Only a transcript remained. Other voices surface in stranger places. A 1959 sermon draft, preserved in the back pages of a Welsh Baptist church hymnal, contains an unsent message. "A girl has spoken to me in confession. She says her husband is her father. She says her family is her church. I cannot tell anyone or I will be accused of slander. Lord, give me courage to carry what I cannot release." The sermon was never preached. The pastor resigned within months. Even the census carried traces of these voices. Enumerators in 1940 listed the Ashcrofts but marked their entries with dashes instead of occupations or marital status. In the margin of the ledger, a faint note reads, "Girl says she is wife, father says same. Filed as married. Age discrepancy ignored." By the next census in 1950, the Ashcroft name vanished completely from county rolls. And then there are the rumors that never reached paper. Stories of a girl who knocked on doors at night, asking to be let in, but neighbors too afraid to open. Stories of children at play repeating verses in sing-song, bride of father, bride of God, bound in blood, sealed in sod. Stories of a woman seen walking barefoot in snow, carrying a veil stiff with frost. None of these stories were written in official files, but they passed through mouths, carried on front porches and through kitchen windows, until silence swallowed them too. What unites every account, from teacher to nurse to neighbor, is the weight of fear. Not fear of madness but of reprisal. Witnesses consistently speak and then fall silent. They vanish from jobs, from homes, from records, as though the act of remembering marked them for removal. The final testimony comes from much later, in 1982, when a local historian named Thomas Lowry interviewed families in Panther Hollow for a proposed county history book. His unpublished notes, later donated to the Appalachian Collection at Marshall University, include this fragment. Met with elderly man, claims to be nephew of Lillian. Said she lived but was made to sign papers she did not understand. Said she bore children who were called brides, before they could walk. He began to weep. Refused further questions. Asked me to leave before dark. Lowry never finished the book. In his correspondence he wrote, "Certain families will not allow their names to be written. They said if I included them, the book would not make it to print." His draft manuscript contains an entire blank chapter, titled simply, "The Bride Who Was Forced to Marry Her Father." The witnesses left behind a trail of fragments, half-finished journal entries, asylum transcripts cut short, sermon notes hidden in hymnals, census ledgers with dashes where names should be. Every one of them points toward the same reality, that what happened in Panther Hollow was not isolated. It was seen. It was heard. It was spoken aloud. And then those voices were silenced. Even today when families are asked, they shake their heads. They say nothing. But sometimes a crack opens, in a misremembered lullaby, in a grandmother's warning not to wear white in June, in the sound of bells carried on wind where no church stands. If the story of the Ashcroft bride survives only in fragments, it is not by accident. It is because someone, many someones, made certain that the files burned, the names blurred, the testimonies cut short. Suppression wasn't a side effect. It was the plan. The first suppression came from the county courthouse itself. In 1954, a fire ripped through the McDowell archives. Officially, the blaze was blamed on faulty wiring in the clerk's office. But the insurance survey filed the following spring noted something peculiar. Damage isolated to marriage ledgers, birth records, select court transcripts. Adjacent tax rolls intact. In other words, the flames chose their pages carefully. Survivors of that fire remembered the smell not of smoke, but of varnish and kerosene. A janitor, interviewed decades later, claimed he saw two men removing boxes from the archive room the night before the blaze. He identified one of them as Deputy Sheriff Wardell Parsons. When asked why, the janitor only said, "Some names weren't meant to be remembered." The second suppression came from the pulpit. Reverend Amos McCrae, who once wrote in his journal about being forced to witness a second round of vows in the Ashcroft cabin, resigned within months. Church correspondence preserved in the Methodist archive reveals that his transfer order included a condition: refrain from mentioning said family in sermons or public testimony. His replacement, a young pastor named Samuel Riley, preached the same year that family is the highest covenant, higher even than the state. No mention of weddings in the Hollow was ever made from that pulpit again. Journalists, too, were silenced. The Bluefield Daily Telegraph edition that reported girl in Hollow taken as bride was systematically removed from libraries across the county. In 1967, a librarian named Ruth Hartsfield filed a letter to the state archive complaining that her copies had been recalled without explanation. In her private diary, later found by her granddaughter, Ruth wrote, "Two men in coats came for the papers. They told me, these are errors. These never happened. I knew they were lying. I could see it in their faces." Suppression also came through the courts. In 1938, a closed hearing titled Ashcroft vs. State was convened. The transcript no longer exists, but docket notes say, "Case dismissed. Family preservation paramount." Judges rarely used that phrase. Legal scholars who reviewed the file in the 1990s concluded it was Code 4, too dangerous to prosecute. It meant, we acknowledge what happened but we will not speak it. The greatest silence of all came from the medical community. Hospital files on Lillian, her fainting fits, her abdominal bleeding, her repeated mantra, "I am married," were marked withdrawn. Nurses who worked those wards later recalled orders from administrators: do not chart certain details. This is not a case for your pen. One nurse, Helen Braddock, did write. Her private letters to a sister in Virginia mention a girl in a dress she couldn't take off, and a father who would not leave her bedside. Those letters, discovered in 1989, remain the only surviving record of her testimony. Even state agencies fell in line. The 1940 census lists the Ashcrofts with dashes where occupations and marital status should be. Census workers filed appeals for clarification. Washington's response: family disputes unresolved. Record as provided. It was a bureaucratic shrug, but it carried the weight of law. The family became official in the eyes of the government, not because it was lawful, but because no one wanted to challenge it. And then there were the fires that followed. In 1962, the Panther Hollow schoolhouse burned to the ground. Locals said the blaze lit up the ridge like a torch. Official cause: lightning strike. But weather records from that night show clear skies. The building had stored confiscated hymnals, punishment logs, and school ledgers that included notations about Ashcroft children. All gone in a single night. In 1979, another fire consumed the home of County Clerk Robert Hensley. Among the losses, private duplicates of marriage records he had kept for safekeeping. Neighbors claimed to hear voices chanting near the property before the blaze began. The fire marshal's report said, electrical fault. Hensley himself told his daughter before he died, they wanted the files. They took them. They left fire where the pages were. Even those who spoke were made to disappear. Margaret Kincaid, the teacher who first raised alarm, vanished from the public record after 1941. Some say she moved north. Others insist she lies buried in an unmarked grave on the edge of the hollow. The folklorist Charles Benton, who recorded Evelyn's testimony in 1973, suffered a stroke days after his tape of her vanished. His family swore he was healthy before. The tape has never resurfaced. Suppression was never a single act. It was a pattern. A judge sealing a file. A pastor refusing to preach. A journalist's story disappearing. A courthouse fire. A hospital administrator ordering silence. Together they wove a web stronger than any truth. And yet, traces remain. A scorched ledger with only the name Ashcroft still legible. A microfilm missing from one county library but present in another. A diary in a box of estate sale books. Each piece survived because someone forgot to burn it, or because fire cannot consume memory. When we study suppression, we are not just reading what was erased. We are listening for the echoes in the blank spaces. We are staring into the margins where ink once lived. We are asking, who had the power to silence? And who paid the price for trying to speak? The answer every time is the same. Those who held the badge, the robe, the pulpit, the pen, they buried the story. Those who lived it were left in silence. But silence is never permanent. A burned courthouse cannot erase a grandmother's warning. A missing microfilm cannot erase the fear in a miner's voice. And a fire cannot consume a truth already carried in blood. The Ashcroft cabin still stands. Not in the way a home endures, with laughter in its rafters or smoke curling from a winter stove. It stands like a scar that never closes, a wound the land itself refuses to heal. County property ledgers confirm the cabin's presence long after the Ashcroft name vanishes from census rolls. In 1949, surveyor George McLemore filed a plat map of Panther Hollow that lists the structure simply as dwelling abandoned. But a note scribbled in the margin reads, porch rail newly mended, curtains drawn tight. McLemore never filed another survey. His widow later told neighbors he returned from that job shaken, repeating only, the house wasn't empty. Architectural records are sparse. A WPA inspector in 1936 described the cabin as two-room log structure, built pre-Civil War, additions crudely attached. He noted that the hearth was unusually deep, lined with stone older than the house itself. He filed photographs with his report, but those prints are missing from the state archive. In their place, only a typed slip, removed July 1942. Folklore says the cabin shifts, not in the way timbers settle or roofs sag, but in its very position. Children told to stay away would swear they saw the windows facing a different direction each time they passed. Hunters claim it creeps deeper into the treeline as if ashamed to be found. Some insist that if you stand at the county line and count 7 ridges, the house will vanish from sight, yet appear again when you turn your back. Inside, the stories darken. In 1965, a team of geology students trespassed to measure the stone hearth. Their notes, preserved at Marshall University, describe heat registering from interior walls despite no fire present. One student, Anna Coleman, wrote, "The smell is wrong. Damp but sweet. As if something rotting had learned to perfume itself." Her notebook ends mid-sentence. She dropped out the following semester and refused to speak of the hollow again. Residents who entered uninvited often described the curtains, hand-stitched, yellowed, yet impossibly clean as if laundered by unseen hands. In 1978, County Deputy Paul Riggs was dispatched to investigate reported squatters. His logbook notes, "House locked. Curtains moving though no breeze. Found front room dustless, floor swept." Weeks later, Riggs left the force. His resignation letter, "I will not return to that place. It looks back at you. There are persistent accounts of a sound beneath the floorboards. Not footsteps, not rats, but something heavier, breathing." In 1984, a group of miners drinking near the hollow dared one another to pry up the cabin planks. One man, Billy Crow, later claimed they uncovered nothing but compacted earth. Yet when they replaced the boards, they heard the steady rhythm of exhale, inhale, exhale, coming from the ground itself. Crow swore the earth rose and fell like lungs. Property deeds complicate the matter. After the Ashcrofts disappeared from the census, no one formally claimed the house. Yet the county clerk's office shows a curious pattern. Every 10 years from 1940 to 1980, the word exempt was penciled beside the parcel. No taxes, no liens, no transfers. Just silence. In the 1990s, the line was blacked out entirely as if the land never existed. And yet, if you walk into Panther Hollow today, the house stands, leaning, sagging but whole. The house carries its own rituals. Locals whisper of lantern light burning at impossible hours, always just out of reach, always extinguished when approached. Others say the wedding dress itself still hangs inside, nailed to the wall above the hearth. In 2001, urban explorers claimed to photograph it, though the image is blurred, more shadow than fabric. Skeptics dismiss it as smoke damage or mold. Believers say the veil still stirs even without wind. What unsettles most who see the cabin isn't what's inside but what's missing. No birds nest in its rafters. No ivy climbs its logs. Snow melts faster on its roof than on the surrounding ground. Botanists who tested the soil in 1972 found no worms, no grubs, no insects at all within a 10-foot circle. Their report concludes, soil sterile. Cause undetermined. For decades, county officials debated demolishing the structure. Each attempt failed. In 1959, a work crew arrived with axes and saws. By dusk, their foreman reported all blades had dulled to uselessness. In 1971, bulldozers broke down half a mile short of the cabin. Their engines seized despite new fuel and full maintenance checks. By the 1990s, proposals no longer included removal. The cabin had become, in bureaucratic language, a standing exclusion. Some believe the house is not the Ashcrofts' creation at all, but something they inherited or awakened. Local Shawnee oral history speaks of a breathing lodge deep in the hollows, where children were given to silence the land's hunger. Settlers who built cabins atop those foundations were said to inherit the bargain sealed long before their arrival. Whether the Ashcrofts knew or not, they lived where no house should stand. Today, hikers stumble upon it rarely, for paths seem to fold around the place. Those who do find it describe the same sensation, the weight of being watched not by eyes but by walls themselves. The house does not creak with age. It hums with memory. The boards swell as though they remember the weight of vows, the press of blood, the echo of a father insisting his God gave permission. And still it stands. Not collapsing. Not consumed by fire. Not taken by storm. The house waits, wrong, enduring, patient. Its silence is louder than wind through the hollows. Patterns are what historians cling to when individual stories fall apart. A single girl in a blood-stained wedding dress could be dismissed as an aberration. A single family, the Ashcrofts, might be written off as a tragedy of isolation. But when records across counties echo the same names, the same practices, and the same silences, then we are no longer speaking of anomaly. We are speaking of ritual. The first hints appear in school rosters. Breathitt County, Kentucky, 1941. Teacher Margaret Delaney's ledger lists 7 children under the surname Kincaid, all enrolled in a one-room schoolhouse along Troublesome Creek. Strangely, 3 are the same age. Not twins, not triplets, each child born in a different month of the same year. Delaney added a private note in her grade book. Siblings call each other husband, wife. Refuse correction. Her log ends abruptly the following year when Delaney resigned. The official reason, nervous exhaustion. In Perry County, a 1953 attendance sheet shows 3 Holloway children. Each dropped out in the 7th grade, all within weeks of one another. Local gossip claimed they married into their own family. The county board listed the reason as domestic relocation. Yet property tax rolls prove the Holloways never moved. The land stayed in their name, the cabin never changed hands. They vanished from education but remained rooted in geography, like weeds left to seed in secret. Then there are the census anomalies. The 1920 McDowell County Census lists the Ashcrofts with 5 children, ages ranging from 6 to 14. By 1930, the family is absent altogether. No death certificates, no recorded burials, no relocation forms. But in 1932, the Kincaids of neighboring Buchanan County suddenly appear with 5 children bearing near identical ages and birth months to the missing Ashcrofts. Same children, new names, bloodlines shuffled like playing cards to conceal the hand. Newspapers, when they dared to print, left breadcrumbs. The Charleston Gazette, November 18, 1959, ran a 3-sentence blurb. Local preacher fined for unlawful ceremony between kin and breathed. Names withheld by court order. The clipping survives in microfilm, but in county courthouse files the case is absent. As though the record recoiled from being written. Genealogists whisper about these gaps. In 1978, amateur historian Vernon Hensley attempted to trace the Ashcroft line. His notes, found years later in a box at an estate sale, outline a disturbing pattern. Every decade, in a 3-county radius, families with the surnames Ashcroft, Holloway, Kincaid, and sometimes McCrae reported sudden surges of children in their households. Children without baptismal records, without proper birth certificates, often without mothers listed. He wrote, "The fathers remain constant. The mothers blur. Folklore overlaps the archives." In Harlan County, elders told stories of the bride in the hollow, a girl forced to marry her kin to keep bloodlines pure. In Wise County, they whispered of the husband brothers, boys who refused outside courtship, claiming wives were already chosen at birth. These stories were dismissed as grotesque exaggerations, Appalachian Gothic fables to scare outsiders. Yet when compared to the records, the alignments are undeniable. The rituals, too, echo across counties. In 1967, a psychiatric intake form at Weston State Hospital records a teenage girl from Clay County repeating, "No father but husband, no husband but father." 20 years earlier, an asylum log from Pikeville noted a woman muttering nearly the same words. Different counties. Different decades. Identical liturgy. By the 1980s, the names no longer appeared in census records. Families learned to hide better. But hints linger. In 1986, a church secretary in Leslie County discovered an old marriage register with half the entries scrubbed in ink. Under the blotches, barely legible, the names Holloway and Ashcroft recur again and again. And then there are the photographs. In flea markets and estate sales across the region, collectors have stumbled upon images too strange to dismiss. One shows a wedding group outside a sagging cabin, bride and groom both marked as Ashcroft cousins on the reverse. Another, undated, depicts a child in a dress far too large, flanked by adults who appear to be parents, but the caption reads simply, "Wedding." These artifacts circulate quietly, traded like contraband among researchers who fear the originals will vanish if brought to light. The deeper one digs, the more the lines blur between families. Ashcroft children appearing as Kincaids. Holloway daughters vanishing, only for McCrae women to give birth months later. Birthplaces altered in ledgers, marriage ages adjusted, kinships rewritten by hand. It is not the story of one family's decay, it is the story of a practice woven through Appalachia like a thread in a poisoned quilt. Each square different. The pattern undeniable. What does it mean when different surnames across different ridges echo the same crimes, the same rituals, the same silences? Was it coincidence? A cultural contagion passed through isolation and poverty? Or something older, buried deeper, compelling these hollows to repeat themselves? The government files are absent. The newspapers minimized. The church records blackened. But the voices remain in whispers, in genealogical margins, in the faces of descendants who refuse DNA tests. Patterns are the one thing silence cannot erase. And still the question lingers, how many families kept their secrets so well that we will never trace them? How many brides wore dresses stitched by the same hands, veils passed down like heirlooms, vows spoken in cabins that no longer show on maps? History has a way of looping back when you least expect it. For decades, the Ashcroft name and its shadowed cousins seemed to vanish from public life, absorbed by migration, erased by sealed records, or diluted through bloodlines too tangled to follow. But the silence didn't hold. In the past 20 years, whispers have returned, whispers made louder not by gossip at general stores or handwritten letters, but by digital traces no one knew to hide. One of the first modern sparks came in 2004. A police log from McDowell County details a call placed just after midnight by a trucker passing through Panther Hollow. His statement reads, "Saw lights in the trees. Looked like lanterns. Heard voices singing low. Thought it was a revival until I saw the girl." He described a young woman in a white dress standing in the road, barefoot, holding what looked like a hymnal. Before officers arrived, she vanished. The responding deputy noted fresh footprints in the mud, small and bare, leading toward the old Ashcroft parcel. The entry ends with the words, "No further action." That same year, a local message board carried a thread titled Hollow Weddings. The original poster claimed their cousin had been promised to her uncle during a gathering in Clay County. Replies poured in, some mocking, others eerily specific. "My grandma told me about the McCrae girl who had to call her daddy husband in church." Another post included a grainy cell phone picture of a circle carved into wood, with a cross inside, what they called a marriage mark. The board was deleted within weeks. By 2011, Facebook posts began to surface. A woman from Pikeville uploaded photos of her daughter's school drawings. One sketch showed a cabin with no doors, only windows. Another depicted a girl in a dress surrounded by men without faces. The caption read, "Don't know where she got this. We don't let her watch scary movies." The comments quickly turned from amusement to unease. Strangers chimed in with near-identical stories about their own children. The post is now gone, account deleted. But screenshots remain, archived in quiet corners of the internet. The return isn't limited to digital murmurs. In 2017, local newspaper The Coalfield Progress reported on a woman hospitalized after walking barefoot into town, singing a hymn no one recognized. She told doctors she was walking away from the wedding. When pressed, she refused to give her last name, only repeating, "The Hollow knows me. The Hollow knows me." No follow-up story was ever printed. Perhaps the most chilling modern account appeared on Reddit in 2019. A user posted under the title, "Kids at school drawing the same symbol, what does it mean?" Attached was a photograph of a classroom whiteboard filled with crude sketches of a cross inside a circle. According to the teacher, none of the children could explain where they had seen it. Some called it the father's ring. Others said, "It's for the wedding." The thread gained traction before being locked. The user deleted their account. Investigators and folklorists tracking these patterns argue that what we're seeing is not resurgence but continuation. The rituals never ended, they simply burrowed deeper. As poverty tightened and isolation worsened in the mountains, families learned new ways to hide in plain sight. No more public ceremonies. No more courthouse records to erase. The weddings became smaller, quieter, disguised as family gatherings, church services, even funerals. But the vows continued, passed like heirlooms and whispers. Modern genealogy software has exposed cracks in the silence. DNA results from Appalachian test groups reveal unusually high rates of closed bloodlines, surnames interlacing across counties in patterns too repetitive to ignore. Some results are marked anomalous, a polite way of noting that the father listed on a birth certificate cannot be the biological father, though the genetic tie is undeniable. These families often refuse follow-up questions, or pull their data offline altogether. In 2021, a series of TikTok videos circulated briefly before deletion. A group of urban explorers filmed themselves entering the Ashcroft cabin, laughing at its reputation. The video showed dust, broken furniture, nothing unusual, until one explorer pointed to a corner. Viewers claim a white shape can be seen hanging on the wall, shifting as if caught in a breeze. Comments exploded with recognition. "That's the dress. My grandma told me about it." Within days the account vanished. No one has been able to contact the original posters. Psychiatrists in the region quietly acknowledge a pattern. A 2022 medical abstract describes adolescents in coal country presenting with identical hallucinations. Women in veils, voices calling them bride, hymns sung in languages they don't know. Doctors blame generational trauma, folklore haunting fragile minds. But the patients often come from families with familiar surnames: Ashcroft, Allway, McCrae. The most recent trace surfaced in March 2024. A hiker posted coordinates on an outdoor forum, claiming to have found a new cabin not on maps, deep in Panther Hollow. Photos show a one-room structure, freshly built, with a cross carved into the lintel. The replies begged the user to stay away. Within hours, the account was deleted, the coordinates scrubbed. Still, cached versions survive. silent proof that something is being built again or has been waiting all along. The question we must ask is not whether the ritual has returned, but whether it ever ended. What we see now are not echoes, they are continuations. The voices are speaking again because no one silenced them, only ignored them. Children draw the marks not because they dreamed them up, but because someone shows them even now. The hollow still claims its brides. The fathers still claim their daughters. And so the dread deepens. If it is happening again, how many are living inside it now, hidden in plain sight? How many weddings will never be written? How many veils stitched in silence? How many names erased from records yet whispered in bedrooms? We are not watching history return. We are watching history persist. Names are supposed to anchor us in time. They fix us to a birth certificate, a gravestone, a census page that proves we once lived. But in the Appalachian hollows, certain names slip loose. They reappear where they shouldn't, written in hands too steady to belong to the aging, scrawled across decades as if ink itself carried blood. Among these, one stands out. Ashcroft. The handwriting is the first clue. In the McDowell County marriage ledger, an entry from October 1937 records the union of a girl named Lillian Ashcroft to Isaac Ashcroft. The officiant's signature is oddly neat, precise, more like a clerk than a preacher. 42 years later, in Buchanan County, another ledger lists the marriage of a teenage girl to a man, again named Isaac Ashcroft. The officiant's signature? Identical, down to the curl of the R and the looping cross of the T. Analysts have compared the samples. It isn't similar. It's the same hand, separated by nearly half a century. How can ink ignore time? Either someone has copied the signature with impossible precision, or the same man is writing his name long after he should have been buried. Court dockets deepen the riddle. A 1959 indictment in Perry County names an Isaiah Ashcroft, accused of indecent liberties with kin. The case never reached trial. A fire reportedly destroyed the courthouse records. Yet a surviving carbon copy reveals his signature on the intake forms. 2 decades later, in a 1978 civil filing in Clay County, the defendant is again Isaiah Ashcroft, accused of unlawful cohabitation. He signs the form in the same curling script. Same pressure marks. Same ink flow. Handwriting experts insist this isn't coincidence, it's continuity. Genealogical charts stumble over these Isaacs and Isaiahs. No one can find clear parentage. Sometimes the surname vanishes from one county's census, only to bloom in the next with new children, new households. A McRae girl disappears from Breathitt County rolls in 1926. By 1930, an Ashcroft daughter of identical age appears in McDowell. The signature ties them together as if one man stitches family trees across county lines, splicing branches to ensure the line doesn't break. Folklore explains it differently. Elders whisper that Isaac was never a man, but a name carried like a mantle. Fathers gave it to sons, brothers to brothers, each inheritor taking the signature as his own. To write it was to bind yourself to the vow, husband, father, priest, all one. In this telling, the handwriting is not supernatural, it is ritualized imitation, practiced until perfect. But skeptics ask, why does the ink match even under magnification as if the hand itself never changed bones or skin? In 1992, a reporter from the Bluefield Daily Telegraph uncovered a startling fragment. She was reviewing juvenile court records when she noticed an entry sealed under confidential family matter. The guardian's name was listed as Isaac Ashcroft. The reporter obtained a photocopy of the file before it was withdrawn. The signature, once again, perfectly matched the 1937 marriage ledger. The article she planned to publish never ran. Within weeks, she left journalism. Neighbors said she began refusing mail that bore her name, as if seeing her own signature frightened her. Digital traces now carry the pattern forward. On genealogy websites, users occasionally upload scanned family Bibles. In one Ashcroft record, the patriarch's name is written across 3 generations. Births from 1902, 1945, and 1976 all bear the same Isaac signature in identical ink tone, as though the pen had never dried. The entry for 1976 adds a note, child promised, husband already chosen. The image has since been deleted, but not before researchers archived it. Some theories push darker still. A folklorist from Eastern Kentucky University argues that the Ashcroft name is less about bloodline and more about inscription. To speak it, to write it, to marry beneath it, is to carry its weight. She describes it as a curse passed in cursive. Once the name is attached to you, she claims, it rewrites your record. Birth certificates shift, census pages blur, death notices misfile. paper itself conspires to keep Isaac alive. There are testimonies from those who tried to escape it. In a 1973 psychiatric intake, a woman named Ruth Holloway insisted that every time she moved counties, the name followed. She told doctors, "It finds me." The preacher opens his book and there's the same hand signing the vows. Even when the man's face changes, the name is still Isaac. Her file ends with transfer notes, destination undisclosed. And then there are the gravestones. Photographs from cemeteries in at least 3 counties show markers etched with the name Isaac or Isaiah Ashcroft, all bearing overlapping lifespans. One died in 1918, another in 1939, another in 1962. But when compared, the lettering style carved into the stone is identical, as if the same mason, or the same will, cut each letter by hand. Researchers call it the signature that won't die. Why does this matter? Because when names refuse to stay buried, stories refuse to end. If Isaac's hand still moves across paper, if his vow still binds girls in white dresses, then history hasn't closed its ledger. It's still writing itself, every decade, every county, one line at a time. And if the name can rewrite itself, then perhaps it can rewrite you. Every story has an ending, but not every ending wants to be found. What lies at the bottom of the Ashcroft file isn't a conclusion, it's an erasure. A silence thick enough to choke. A trail that loops back on itself until you don't know whether you're following the record or the record is following you. In October 2001, a basement clerk cataloging old property deeds in McDowell County stumbled on a box that wasn't supposed to exist. No index number. No date. No lock. Inside, brittle folders labeled Ashcroft, sealed. The clerk flipped through brittle papers and found marriage licenses, death notices, and school rosters. Some bore wax seals that crumbled at her touch. One page stood out. A certificate of death for Isaac Ashcroft, 1939. 'Cause drowning in a well. But written across the margin in red, duplicate record. Do not release. Duplicates. That was the pattern. The same Isaac dying again in 1957, automobile accident. Again in 1976, pneumonia. Again in 1991, unspecified natural causes. 4 deaths. 1 man. Each time the paper declared the end. Each time the next decade wrote him back into the census. The courthouse basement held more than death certificates. Folded at the bottom was a map. Hand-drawn, the paper stained with mildew. The lines sketched a hollow between Panther Ridge and Elkhorn Creek. At its center, a circle marked wedding ground. A note beneath it read, "Do not disturb. Record sealed by order of the county." Researchers who traced the coordinates found nothing but scrubland. Yet GPS records flickered strangely in that place. Devices looped, spinning location markers as if refusing to settle. One investigator claimed that every time he entered the hollow, his phone calendar reset itself. Not just the date but the year, reverting to 1937. When he returned home, his voicemail carried static recordings of a voice repeating, "The vow is never broken." The deeper you go, the more the files resist you. In 2015, a genealogist submitted a Freedom of Information request for Ashcroft-related records. Weeks later, she received an envelope. Inside was only a single page. Blank except for a faint watermark, the outline of a wedding ring. She swore she hadn't imagined it. She filed again. This time the envelope arrived empty. The request was marked fulfilled. Even the libraries betray the same pattern. Microfilm reels of the Bluefield Daily Telegraph skip issues whenever the Ashcroft name appears. In the gaps, handwritten notes in the margins say, "See sealed file." The McDowell Gazette archives contain brittle photographs of children in white dresses standing barefoot outside a clapboard church. But beneath the photos, captions are blacked out. Some archivists admit the redactions aren't ink. They're voids, as if the image itself refused to keep a name. By now you've noticed the silence that follows these stories. Those who chase them don't return whole. The 2001 clerk who discovered the box? She quit her job within a month. Her neighbors said she started refusing to sign checks, letters, even her driver's license renewal. "Every time I hold a pen," she said, "it feels like someone else is guiding my hand." She died in 2004. Her signature on the death record? Uncannily close to the Ashcroft script. This is the horror of it. Not that the Ashcrofts died or lived, not that they married their children or buried their secrets, but that the paper remembers them better than people do. The file isn't just history, it's a mouth still speaking, still demanding. Every marriage license renewed, every death duplicated, every census reprinted is another vow written in ink that refuses to dry. And so we end not with answers but with a question that gnaws. What happens when you read your own name in their file? Because one of the last surviving fragments, a brittle page found lodged behind a courthouse cabinet, carries a list of surnames. Ashcroft, McCrae, Kincaid, Hartsfield, Allway. And then, faint at the bottom, new names, added in shakier script. Names of families who read too far, spoke too much, remembered when they should have forgotten. The page ends mid-stroke as though the hand writing it was interrupted. Or perhaps it never needed to finish. Perhaps it waits for us. And here we are, staring into the hollow of their silence. Maybe the reason the records vanish is because the story isn't finished. It rewrites itself every time someone speaks, every time someone remembers, every time someone whispers the names. Which means, by listening, you've already stepped inside the file. If your family has a hollow it never speaks of, if your grandparents warned you against certain ridges, if you've ever found your own surname where it shouldn't belong, you already know what this is. Write it below. Let the record know you saw it. Add your line before someone erases it. And subscribe, not for us but for the file itself. Because silence is how it wins. And the next entry may already be yours.